Hello, and welcome to Mental Health Matters Podcast. I'm your host, Liz Lang, and I'm here with Dr. Mark Burton. In this podcast, we will talk about all things mental health. Thank you so much for joining us. Hey guys, Liz Lang here with Dr. Mark Burton, and this week we're going to get into what is romance. So by the time this episode airs, Valentine's Day will have already happened. Now, it hasn't quite happened yet for Mark and I because we record early. So I'm going to start by sharing my mixed feelings on Valentine's Day.
And I am really curious, Liz, about this. Have I ever run into anyone who you have mixed feelings? So you're saying you have both positive and negative.
Yes. Okay. So on the one hand, I love cheesy romance. I'm a hopeless romantic. I love the stories where the guy gets the girl at the end and they live happily ever after. And I mean, my views of happily ever after, well, I mean, you could probably figure those out. Anyways, and like I love that stuff. I love romance. But Valentine's Day is so Hallmark. It's just an excuse for people to jack up the prices of flowers and chocolates. And more importantly, I don't celebrate my love one day a year. Like every day should be a celebration of your love. And not that it needs to be as grandiose as sometimes people do on Valentine's Day, but I mean, it shouldn't be relegated to one day a year.
Well, that's kind of why we chose the topic of romance today.
Probably.
To talk about, all of the 364 days, rest of the days of the year.
Yeah.
But I think I like having a day set aside to remind people. I agree with you. It shouldn't just be one day a year. I think that's a huge mistake for couples. If that's the only day that you're either buying flowers or chocolates or doing something special for your partner or spouse, I think that's a big mistake. But I think to have a day set aside, for people who are in love, that's nice. I think that I see a different drawback to this. And I think it's really hard for people who are not in a relationship. Yeah. And so in my work, I certainly see people who are not in relationships, but who would like to be in relationships. And you come up to a day like February 14th, that's tough for them because they're alone. Everybody else is, buying flowers. You go into Costco. Have you ever been to Costco, a few days before Valentine's? The roses are everywhere.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
Roses everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I think if you were not in a relationship, that might not feel very good to see that.
So when I was at BYU, Idaho, they called it SAD. They called Valentine's Day SAD, Single Awareness Day.
It's called what?
Single Awareness Day.
Single Awareness Day.
Yeah. I think it was just trying to be sensitive to people who are single. I don't know. But they called it SAD. They called Valentine's Day SAD, Single Awareness Day. So I don't know.
Well, maybe that's why you don't like Valentine's Day.
I mean, okay, so I've come to terms with it. And here's what we do. Every year for Valentine's Day, as a family, we go get ice cream. And I love it.
It's a really nice thing to do.
Yes.
See, I think you can market as a family too.
Yes.
And we always, do things for our grandkids and used to for our kids. So I like that. It doesn't just have to be a romantic partner. I think that Valentine's Day can certainly be something where you're just expressing love for those around you.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of how I've come to reckon with it. And it's something we all enjoy. We look forward to it every year, and we're excited this year to be able to, include the kid's grandpa in it because he lives with us. Yeah. And so, on Valentine's Day, we're all going to go out and we're going to get ice cream. And, it's fun. It's become a really fun, enjoyable tradition. So I do look forward to Valentine's Day. But I mean, maybe some of my apprehensions about it or some of my misgivings, maybe it's not some of the things that we're going to get into. And part of it is I think what we'll get into later is the materialism of Valentine's Day. Yeah,
I can see how that's hard. I think the materialism for most of our holidays, I mean, if you think about Easter or Halloween, the whole idea of candy decorate. I think there's so much money spent like on Halloween, which is kind of strange to me. But so we live in a capitalistic society, which I get. But, if you take something that could like Valentine's Day, I think you have to do what you've done which is shift how you celebrate it.
Yeah.
And that will change the meaning of it. But I like Valentine's Day. I like celebrating it. I've never had the negative feelings that you've had. But then I also try and do things the other days of the year too. So
Right. And so let's just dive right in then and talk about what romance is and why it matters in a relationship. Does romance even matter in a relationship? So I think first you need to define what romance is.
I think that's hard. I think
Yep.
that, I mean, one thing I really found out is I think romance is different for every person. But let me answer the first question where you said, do you think romance is important in a relationship? I really think it is.
Okay.
Now, as I have said before, I see a certain segment of the population, typically couples who are struggling. But what I hear often, and again, I'm going to make a generalization, it isn't always true, but the generalizations fit. It's usually the woman in the relationship who wants more romance. And
Hmm.
it's typically the man in the relationship who has trouble being romantic. Now, I think I'll go back to what I've said many times. I don't think we raise men well to be emotionally focused. And I think in romance, there is certainly a pretty strong element of emotion, love, concern, consideration. So here's one idea about romance. I think it's about expressing love and dedication to a partner in a way that's really intentional. I think that's
Hmm.
important.
Okay.
What it is that I've thought about you, I've thought about something that would have meaning for you, and I'm going to do something for you. And so I think where you really have to be careful is this is like the five love languages that we talked about,
Hmm.
that you have to, what is romantic to your partner?
Yeah.
What is romantic to me is certainly not the same as what is romantic to Lindy. And
Hmm.
so, I have to know what it is that says romance to her. And then those are the things that I would want to do for her. But then likewise, she would know what it is for me and she would do those things that have meaning for me. So I think at the heart of it, it's about expressing love, caring. I think passion is a word we'll probably use a couple of times tonight. Dedication, I like that. I am committed to you.
Hmm.
So I think that's what romance is. But again, it depends on the person, what it means to you. What does it mean to
Right.
you? I'm curious. Are you willing to
Sure.
share? What does
I
that
mean,
mean?
so you said something before we got started, and it really resonated with me. And I think romance for me, it's really about its connection. It's
Hmm.
feeling connected, right? And, when I think of romance, I think of the typical, roses and cards, and I thought of you and I surprised you. I want to surprise you with this gift and that kind of a thing. But it's
Hmm.
being able to connect with someone. And really, I think the essence of romance for me is I thought of you. I think is how I would break down
Yeah.
romance is I'm doing this because I know it's something you appreciate.
Yeah. And so here's an example. This is how Lindy knows me, that, and this may not seem romantic to other people, but I love opera. I think I've said that before on here. I
Okay.
really love opera. And I don't
I
like ballet though. I hate
okay.
ballet.
I don't think you have said that before because I did not know that about you. I didn't know that you
Yeah, I
love
don't.
opera.
Lindy loves dance. Like
Okay.
she would love to go to the ballet. And I love opera. And so she bought me, I think I told you the Utah State University every year has a really wonderful opera festival that goes on through July and August up in Logan, Utah. And so she bought me tickets. And so she and I went and we spend, it's usually just one night or two nights. And then we see these operas and musicals. And to me, we're experiencing these things together that we both love. And I remember, seeing that we saw a couple of operas that we really, really liked and that sat sitting next to each other. She gave me this because she knows I like it. But then we're connecting over how we both appreciate, what we've seen and experienced. So to me, that can be romantic. And then the
Okay.
other thing that's romantic to me, and this, happens once in a while, as far as the trips she and I take together are certainly romantic. We're going to be traveling on Valentine's Day this year, and that'll be fun for us.
Okay. Yeah. So I think you make a good point is you need to talk to each other in order to know what your partner finds romantic. So
Yeah.
let's maybe break it down a little bit more and talk about how to do that because if you have to tell someone to do something romantic, doesn't that kind of make it unromantic?
Okay. So I run into this all the time. And
Okay.
usually here's the context. You're trying to get someone to change their behavior. And so let's say you have a man, typically,
Hmm.
again, I'm generalizing, doesn't really know how to be romantic. I mean, if you think about all the things we've talked about as far as, how our brain is wired,
Hmm.
and so his brain isn't wired that way to think like affectionately or passionately or thoughtfully. There are some people who have trouble with that, not just men, but sometimes women. And so you are really trying to get them to change the wiring in the brain. And as I've said before, the only way to get that wiring to change is through behavior. So then you're left with, do I have to tell you what to do?
Yep.
And my answer is yes.
Okay.
Or often I will be, if I'm seeing a couple, I'll be the one that says, okay, here's what I want you to do
Hmm.
this week until I see you again. And one of them is going to say, yeah, well, he's only doing it because you told him to. And my response is always, it doesn't matter.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter because what you want to do is eventually you want to create new habits. I mean, habits are just about creating new
Hmm.
wiring in your brain. And so if you have to then remind yourself, and I say that I said it to my last client today, I said, you've got to put something in your phone because he's having trouble changing his behavior and essentially being romantic, although we haven't used those words. But you have to remind yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that because if you're consistent, 6 months from now, guaranteed he's not going to have the reminder on the phone because it becomes part of who he is.
Okay.
It becomes part of it because what you've done is you've created a habit, and habits can be, I'm thinking about you, I'm going to figure out something to do for you. That's just a habit. That's all it is. Touching. So, for a lot of people, just reaching out, holding your hand, like if you're sitting somewhere and you put your hand on your spouse's knee or something like that, that can be a romantic gesture. I
Hmm.
think another one that Gottman talks about that he calls it, he likes the term ritual. He uses it frequently. So he talks about the ritual of leaving in the morning and coming back in the evening. And
Yep.
he really thinks and well, I believe this, but he's the one who kind of, through his research, found out it's really important. And so the ritual of how do I leave? Do I hug you? Do I hold you? Do I kiss you? And then when I come home, do we greet each other again in a similar fashion? And I think that the touch, taking the time to just stop. I remember Lindy and I went up to a conference to Seattle with him, and he had this whole crew working for him, and they all had T-shirts. And I think the T-shirt said something like 10 seconds is all it said. And what he was saying is just try and kiss your partner for 10 seconds. Now,
Okay.
if you're doing that, it feels like an eternity.
Okay.
I mean, if you think about it,
Yeah.
but 10
Yeah.
seconds is not very long. But that's not typically what we do.
Yeah.
Here's a
Okay.
challenge for you tonight. When we're done, go kiss Curtis and count to 10 and see what he does.
Oh, I know exactly what he's gonna do. He's gonna think it's going somewhere. I don't have to do this experiment,
Well,
Mark.
okay, but see, that's what I try to help couples. I think you really need to separate. It does
Yeah.
because kissing for 10 seconds does not necessarily mean, or it shouldn't mean, I think it shouldn't mean you're going to go have sex. It should just be one of those things that happens.
Okay. Yeah.
I love you. I want to be romantic in this 10 seconds, so I'm going to kiss you. Doesn't have to be sex.
I agree. I agree with you. So let's talk about that, about the fact that so many men, and again, I'm making a generalization, but as we've said, the thing about generalizations is they're generally true. That's why
Yeah.
it's a generalization. So for a lot of men, romance is the equivalent to sex. Let's
Yes. I think men need to change that. I do.
Okay, so I mean, tell me about that. Why do you think men need to change that?
We go back to emotional connection
Hmm.
or being affectionate. For most men in long term relationships, they really do want to be emotionally close to their spouse,
Hmm. Yes.
but they don't know any other way to do it.
Okay.
So sex comes naturally, it's a drive. We
Hmm.
want to have sex. And I think what happens once they then start having sex, so at the start of the relationship, they start having sex, and you've got all these physiological things going on in your body, and you feel great, and you feel close, and you feel connected, right? And that feels romantic. And so But the problem is that's the only way you get there. And
Hmm.
I think there are many other ways that you can get there that are just as important. And so to separate well, I call it non-sexual touch and sexual touch. But I think that romance can be separated. Like, for instance, if I bring you flowers, that doesn't mean, okay, you're going to have sex with me tonight.
Hmm.
Because then it doesn't feel good to the person getting the flowers. It's almost like a bribe.
Yeah. Well, okay, here's a good point culturally of why I think, or at least an example of the way this exists culturally. So I was reading about dating in today's society and how a lot of women they prefer to be more egalitarian in their
Uh-huh.
dating, in that they like to split the cost. And the reason they prefer to split the cost is because there's no expectation. If they can share the cost, it means there's no expectation for sex. And I read that and I was like, and it made me cringe a little bit.
Right, because I understand that you want to be egalitarian, but I had to be able to take you out to dinner and not have it mean, okay, now you gotta have to have sex with me.
Yes.
They should not be connected.
No, I
Those
was
should
like,
be those should be separated because
yeah.
then see, if you think about a romantic dinner,
Hmm.
like for some people going out to a romantic dinner, so you go to a nice restaurant and you might dress differently than you normally do, and it might, there may be music or whatever it is. I think that can be romantic, but you really need to separate it from sex. So I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's a mistake, and
Hmm.
I think that most often men are going to make that mistake of linking the two. If I'm going to be romantic, then we're going to have sex. But as I said, I think the reason is in a long-term relationship, after they have sex with their partner, they're feeling really connected.
Yes.
And that's what
And
they're after.
and we're not trying to discount sexuality in a relationship. I hope nobody thinks
No,
that, because
no, not at all.
it is very, very important. But I mean, like anything else, it's a process. And
Right.
so how do you get to that point of, you know, wanting to be intimate, right? And so last week, or maybe it was the week before, I talked about how men are kind of like a light switch and women are more like a toaster oven.
Yeah.
Like, we need a little time. We like a little warm up. And I think sometimes men forget that. And they also can sometimes mistake, foreplay for just physical touching. Foreplay
Right.
doesn't have to be physical touching. And that's a discussion you need to have with your partner. What gets you excited?
Right.
What makes you want to be intimate?
Right. And so I hope what I'm going to say next doesn't sound like a contradiction, but I think you can take sexuality and make it romantic or make it special. So
Okay.
and you can think of it as, at the start of a relationship, sexuality is typically more passionate.
Hmm.
And over time, we lose that. And so I think part of romance can be, I'm going to make an extra effort is what it would be. I'm going to
Hmm.
do something different. And so, we get that dopamine rush, and I'm going to do something different that says, I'm really going to focus on you. And so it might be more sensual. It might be more erotic. And so it's in the context of sexuality, but I think it can be romantic.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
and so I don't want our listeners to think, oh, sex shouldn't be linked with romance. I think it's often linked with romance, and that's fine. It doesn't always have to be linked with romance. So,
It's about the process
right,
is
right.
really what we're getting to. All right. I don't remember where I heard this, but I know it was in someone who did it. It might have been Gottman, but it was someone who did a book on relationships. And it's mature people say what they want.
Hmm. Yeah. I don't know if that comes from Gottman either,
Okay.
but I think that, well, so I run into couples who the thinking is that if you know me well enough, then you'll know what I want without me having to say it.
No.
So we are not psychic, which I
No.
said that before. But again, I think that being direct, let's say being direct or being explicit about what you want is really important. But again, it's the process, it's how you do it.
Hmm.
So you can't just, go up to someone and say, hey, I'd really like XYZ. I think you have to have the right context about you're talking about what has meaning to each of you. So the process is really important, but I think that's true for all couple communication. So I think being direct, not making your partner guess what it
Yes.
is that you like, that's really important because if you have to guess, you're both going to be disappointed sometimes.
Right.
Here's the problem for the person making the gesture. They're going to put all this effort into doing this and this and this, and then all of a sudden it doesn't have any meaning for their partner. Think how awful that would feel. It feels
Yeah.
terrible, right? I made all this thought and effort. Whereas if you have an idea of what it is that your partner likes, then you've got a direction to go to, and then you do the same thing. You put a lot of thought into it, but you're going down the right road instead of the wrong road.
Hmm. Yes.
But
Yes, exactly. So, I think a good example of this is Christmas and birthdays for Curtis and I. And I was talking to my mom one year and she's like, "Oh, what are you up to?" And I said, "Oh, we're shopping for stocking stuffers." And she's like, "For yourself?" And I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "You buy your own stockings?" I was like, "Yeah, I also buy and wrap my own Christmas presents." And so the reason being is because Curtis and I, we kind of just gave up on surprising each other because Christmas and birthdays, you want to get something you want,
yes,
and we're both okay with it. We've come to this conclusion that we say, "What do you want?" And we just do it. That way, there's no unmet expectations and there's no disappointment because we know we're going to get what we want. And so I think that that's an important conversation for couples to have or to be okay with it.
right. And you have to, I mean, there's a whole thing around gift giving that we have to be more open and explicit and do what works for us. So
Hmm.
This took Lindy a long time to figure out. And she got this from her family of origin because her mother would always make these grand gestures, surprises for Lindy's dad. Like, for instance, one year, just out of the blue, no one had ever said, "Hey, I want snowmobiles." But all of a sudden, there were two snowmobiles there, and no one ever used the snowmobiles
Oh,
because, and I don't even remember how it got to be snowmobiles. So it was a grand gesture, quite an expensive one that really fell flat.
hmm.
And so in the early years of our marriage, well, maybe halfway through our marriage, Lindy kept trying to do that. She thought that was the way, that one gives gifts to a spouse, is that you have to surprise them. And so we've changed that, and it's much better now because what would happen is I can't even remember, I think she got me cross country skis once. I hadn't asked for cross country skis. And the problem is I have really flat feet and I
Mm.
can't do it. It just
Oh,
kills my feet.
yeah.
And so, here is this nice gesture that just went, fell flat. So I think talking about your expectations, if it works better, like the way you and Curtis do it, and Lindy and I do pretty much that as well. We talk about things now instead because then you aren't disappointed.
Yep. Now, I think when you do this, I think it is important to still set the expectation of when you're going to get these gifts. And for us, Christmas really it revolves around our kids. It's kind of where it's
Yeah.
centered around. And so we don't get to use the gifts until Christmas.
Hmm.
I mean, and with birthdays, it's a little bit different. It's kind of like I guess we kind of do the month of the birthday. But I think that's important because otherwise you can be sitting here and saying, "Well, it's June and I want this for Christmas." And that can ruin it a little bit. So I think
Right, because it's not really Christmas. And it's really
no.
important to learn how to wait for things.
Yes.
Remember, the delayed gratification is what it is. There were
Yeah.
these great experiments, I think, done at Stanford or Berkeley with kids and marshmallows. It's kind of
Yes.
a thing with
Yeah.
delayed gratification. An important thing for us to learn early on in our lives.
Okay. We have time, so we're going to go off on a tangent here
Okay.
about instant gratification. Why do people associate online shopping with instant gratification? It's not. Instant gratification is I can go to the store and I can buy it today. Online shopping, you have to wait for it.
Uh, you know, that's not quite the same with Amazon nowadays. You can like
It's
you can
true.
order some things. Okay. I don't know how it is where you are. In Salt Lake, they must have a big
That's a
warehouse
yeah.
because I can order something at 10 in the morning and by 5 o'clock it's on my doorstep. Now
Yes.
that's pretty instant gratification. I don't know that online shopping, I don't know if I would categorize it as instant gratification. I think there's something else. It's, let's say you're a shopaholic. The way I've heard it explained, it's almost like you've got that emptiness inside that you carry around with you. And you have learned this only works temporarily. It doesn't work long term.
Yes.
That buying things, it's kind of like filling up that emptiness. And I mean, that's one thing I've heard about it. The other is that for a lot of people, it's a psychological thing that says, I can do this, I can spend this money, I must be okay, even though they may not be.
Yep.
It's like a deception. And so probably isn't surprising to you. A lot of people who do that do a lot of online shopping. They end up sending this stuff back often without it being even opened. I think I told you one of Lindy's sisters, I think
Hmm.
she bought clothes. She just bought clothes and clothes and clothes and clothes, and she never wore them. And she gave them to my daughters when they were teenagers,
Yeah.
and most of them had tags on.
Right.
The tags were not taken off. So for whatever reason, she got some gratification by buying these clothes, but then never used them.
Hmm.
So I think it's not I think it's a complex issue,
Yeah.
that shopaholic.
So I think we are preconditioned from birth for instant gratification. I mean, because if you think about it, if a baby cries and they're saying they're hungry, mom instantly feeds them.
That's the way it ought to work. But you do realize that I mean, that's so that we get into attachment, because that's where attachment doesn't happen, is if the mother or the caregiver doesn't interpret the signal correctly. So
Okay.
that is exactly how it should work. And when that's actually the start of attachment. I
Hmm.
have a need, I'm just going to cry. I obviously can't say, "Hey mom, I'm hungry."
Hmm.
Mother responds and takes care of the need. That is the start of attachment. But
Okay.
you're right. I think it is. I go wah wah and I get what I want.
Yeah. It's from
So
birth.
yeah, it starts pretty early.
Yeah. Okay.
But I
So,
think, but I think parenting. So you and I could just go off on tangents all night. You know
oh
that, right?
yeah. Oh yeah.
So in parenting, at some point, it's really important to help the child move away from that
Hmm.
to more of a delayed gratification, because that isn't the real world, right?
Yes.
And yeah,
Yeah.
the point.
Okay. So switching
Okay.
gears back to romance.
So this can be a wrap up to romance. I
Okay.
think that what I found is, like a person, and it could be the man or the woman in the relationship, or if it's a gay relationship, the two men or the two women.
Hmm.
And you might think, oh, I want to do something romantic for my partner. And part of the issue is you spend all this time thinking, okay, what shall I do? And so I think it's important. There are a couple of steps. One, have the talk with your partner.
Hmm.
What is it that's romantic to you? The second step, keep a list.
Hmm.
Make an exhaustive list of all the things that you might do, so that in the moment when you're thinking, "Oh, I want to be romantic," or "I want to do something romantic," you don't have to spend all the time thinking. You can actually look at your list and think, "Oh, I haven't done that one in a while. I'm going to do that one." If you go through those steps,
Hmm.
it makes it much more likely that you're going to be romantic more often, because you have what's romantic to your partner right there in front of you. And then the final step is just to figure out a way to remind yourself every so often to do it.
Hmm.
And I think that's important too, because we have busy lives and we get distracted. And so I think most people have a phone, and if you put some sort of reminder in the phone, that comes up every so often, however you want, and then you have this list, which you can also keep in your phone,
Hmm.
then you're going to be set. Because I think one of the biggest excuses I hear is, I don't know what to do. You know, like the partner saying, "I really want you to be more romantic. I don't know what to do." Well, solve it by having the conversation and keeping the list, and then
Yes.
posting reminders. So you can go to the internet. I won't go through these. I just did a search. You can go to the internet and find hundreds, I'll say, ideas about romance, and pick out
Hmm.
the ones that work for you and pick out the ones that have meaning for your partner. So a lot of these ideas, it's really about the thought. And so, like, one of them is to plan a date, or maybe a weekend away or a trip. And if you plan everything so that the partner doesn't have to do anything, that has huge meaning for our spouses. And
Hmm.
I've heard this, from many, many women, that they want their husbands to be more proactive. And especially if they have kids, they want their
Yeah.
husband to figure out, okay, what's going to happen to the kid? Not who's going to
Yes.
take care of the kids?
Yeah.
And so all that's involved in that is this idea: I thought about you. I want to be with you. I want to be with you in such a way that I've planned this getaway. That is incredibly romantic. it's also very meaningful for our
Yes.
partners. So maybe the takeaway on romance is it's about the thought, I'm thinking about you, and I'm going to do something to show you that I care and that I love you.
Yep. That sounds like a really good wrap up. And so one thing I want to add is this is good for kids to see. It's
Yes.
healthy. It's very healthy and very good for kids to see mom and dad being romantic, for them to be affectionate.
Yes.
I once saw this thing I saw a meme on the internet that said, be good parents, gross your kids out by kissing in front of them. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Right.
Yes.
And I don't know why. I don't know the psychology behind it of why it's so good for kids to see that their parents are in love.
Well, because it's a visual indicator that the marriage is okay.
Okay.
The biggest fears for kids, two biggest fears. One is that one of the parents will die. Two, they'll get a divorce. And so it's the dissolution of the family. So if you're showing that in front of them, it gives them a great sense of safety.
Okay. And I want to maybe push back at that a little bit. And I'm not saying you should fight in front of your kids, but I'm also saying it's good to let your kids, when it comes up, I guess, organically, to see your conflict resolution.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about the resolution to the conflict, because if you're
Yeah.
screaming and yelling, that is not a good example to have. And hopefully,
No.
Couples aren't doing that anyway, because you can have conflict without that. But I
Yes.
think what it is good to see is for children is difference of opinion that it then is resolved in a way that works for both people.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because it's going to be about compromise. And so if you think of real world and your kids growing up and getting into relationships of their own, long-term relationships are all about accommodation and compromise. And so
Yep.
what you're doing is you're letting your kids see that process.
Yep. Absolutely. And folks, that's romantic.
Yes. Yeah.
So, all right, everyone, we will see you next week.
Have a good week, everyone.
Have a question for Dr. Burton? How about a topic you'd like us to cover? Send us an email at mentalhealthpod21@gmail.com. This podcast was produced and edited by Liz Lang. Music is by Audio Lounge.